Hi, I'm Micah Halpern. Thank you for joining me today as I do some thinking out loud. Our first segment is called Background Briefing. The first thing I've been thinking about is there are two types of misspeaks. The first is a gaffe. That's when the speaker, a leader, a friend, a professor accidentally says the wrong thing. Often the words that inadvertently emerge are funny. A correction is made, chuckling, we move on. It happened to all of us all the time. It happens to friends. It happens everywhere. These misspeaks fall into the famous categories of malaprops and spoonerisms. Mrs. Malaprop was a character in the 1775 play The Rivals by Richard Sheridan. The character was constantly misusing words that sound similar. She was the 18th century precursor to television's Archie Bunker in the 1970s legendary sitcom called All in the Family. Archie was the master of his home and his own unique universe. He misspoke all the time, making for funny, albeit almost entirely politically incorrect, dialogue. Yogi Berra, the ball player and manager, was another famous malaproper. "It's deja vu all over again" is one of his most often quoted misspeaks. Another famous and uncredited malaprop is saying polo bears in place of polar bears. Spoonerisms get its name from Reverend Spooner, a circuit preacher and a nervous speaker and history teacher who inverted his words as he spoke. It is he who is famous for saying, "It is customary to cuss the bride." And another is, "Stop hissing my mystery lessons," in place of "stop missing my history lessons." Not at all offensive, even cute. Embarrassing, only for the speaker. The second type of misspeak is when the speaker really does not understand what they're saying. They make a mistake and their correction proceed to prove just how little they understand not only of what they said, but also what they were intending to say. This is what happened when the Romanian Minister of Agriculture, a social democrat named Petre Dea, described and commented on the slaughter of 44,580 pigs determined to be a potential carriers of African swine fever virus, ASFV. It is extremely contagious and, unchecked, had the potential to infect many, many more pigs. The fever had already infected one particular farm in southern Romania, and so the pigs had to be killed. It was the correct decision to make. What happened next was completely inappropriate and a glaring misunderstanding of culture and abuse of history. On national television, as Minister Dea was describing events at the farm, he said, and this is the quote, "The pigs are all incinerated. It's extraordinary work. It's like Auschwitz." Dea later apologized, but the statement he made, rather than explaining his actions, further mired him in his misspeak and demonstrated how little this official representative of Romania knows about Auschwitz and the Holocaust, especially how little he understands about the Nazi murder machine itself. Quote, "I only wanted to present the particularly difficult situation facing pig breeders from the African swine fever. In my soul, there is a lot of pain. I wanted to describe the awful moments our farmers face," unquote. Drawing a comparison, any comparison, between the mass murder of millions of human beings and the slaughter of pigs is morally perverse. It is so off base that saying more in an effort to rectify it only underscores the gravity of the original misspoken statement. Explaining that pigs needed to be destroyed to save the greater society is exactly the Nazis' justification for exterminating every Jew. Romanians should be totally aware of these issues. Certainly someone as mature as Petre Dea, the minister and the government, should know and understand. Romania was allied with Germany until the very last part of the war, in August of 1944. It was not until 2003 that Romania officially acknowledged its connection to the Nazi Holocaust and the murder of the Jews of Europe. The Romanian president at the time commissioned an international committee to investigate the role of Romania in the Holocaust. The commission was actually chaired by Elie Wiesel. Before the Holocaust, the Jewish community in Romania numbered 800,000. It was the third or fourth largest in the world. Today, there are maybe 10,000. The vast majority of Romanian Jews were murdered in the Nazi murder machine. However, a good number were murdered by civilian Romanians or Romanian military. Elie Wiesel himself, undeniably the most famous of Romanian Jews to survive the Holocaust, concluded in the commission that between 280,000 and 380,000 Jews, that's between 40 to 45%, were murdered by their fellow Romanians. We are witnessing an alarming trend in the rise of the misuse and abuse of Holocaust terminology. This is an outgrowth of an effort to expand the lexicon of metaphors. We hear it when a local police shootout is referred to as a Holocaust. It isn't. We read it when political adversaries are described as Nazis. They're not. Even when neo-Nazis and skinheads are referred to as Nazis, they are abhorrent, they are dangerous, they are evil, but they are not Nazis. And when the President of the United States is repeatedly called a Nazi or compared to Hitler in august publications like the New York Times, those speakers, writers, and editors are as guilty of misspeaking and abusing terminology as is the Romanian Minister of Agriculture. But the audience they reach and the abuse they spread is far greater. The best defense that can be offered for Petre Deas is blissful ignorance. His lack of knowledge is self-inflicted. There is a skewed sense of reality in Romania about the role they played in the murder of the Jews during the Holocaust, a very similar situation to the delusion of many other Eastern European states. Let's hope that this turns into a positive teaching moment for all of Romania and not an unfortunate cause célèbre as it did in Poland. There is a fundamental synapse in perceptions between Americans and Israelis regarding Donald Trump, the 45th President of the United States. It's not just an ocean and a time zone that divides red, white, and blue from blue and white. Israelis can be extremely nuanced in their perceptions, very sensitive in their critique of art, theater, music, food, history, film, and of course politics. But almost all of it, without exception, goes away when it comes up to sizing up a friend or a foe, an ally or an enemy. Israelis are simple there. They are quick to judge, and when that happens, issues, insight, and deep evaluations go out the window. It happened when the US President Bill Clinton became embroiled in the Monica Lewinsky scandal. A large billboard was erected in Tel Aviv proclaiming, "We're behind you, Bill." It didn't matter to most Israelis that the most powerful man in the world, the President of the United States, had exploited his position and did not have sex with an intern. In the eyes of the Israelis, he was a friend, a good friend, and that is all that counted. So too with regard to Donald Trump. No one, friend or foe, of Israel alike can deny that President Trump has been the most positive president for Israel in recent history, and possibly in history. Declaring that the United States recognizes Jerusalem as Israel's capital is unparalleled in foreign policy. Opening the US Embassy in Jerusalem was a watershed in international diplomacy. But here's the catch. Friends are much more likely to cause serious and deep harm than the harm caused by enemies. Familiarity in this case breeds comfort. And when one is too comfortable, it is easy to get hurt. That is precisely what happened under the Clinton presidency. It was Bill Clinton who pushed the Oslo Accords. Oslo would never have made it through the internal Israeli debate had George Bush 41 been president, and had he been the one to propose Oslo peace deals. Bush proposed the Madrid Conference. And who remembers that? The Oslo proposals would never have been entertained, period. The Clinton team convinced Israel that Oslo was the answer. After all, the United States under Clinton was a true friend. And true friends would never steer each other wrong, or so Israelis blindly believed. And now Israel, and by extension the world, stands on the precipice of another US-sponsored and conjured plan for peace between Israel and the Palestinians. And here's the caveat. The goodwill that has been engendered by the United States' change in policy on Jerusalem must stand on its own. It must not color Israel's perspective, Israel's acceptance or rebuttal of the US peace plan. When the United States peace plan is revealed, there will be some very difficult elements for Israel to swallow. It is inevitable. The United States will insist and actually believe that they came through for Israel with Jerusalem. And now it's time for Israel to pay back, to reciprocate. The best way for Israel to manage the U.S. peace initiative, no matter what it proposes or what it entails, is to make certain that the response is a firm and resounding yes. Let the Palestinians say no. A response they were very practiced and skilled in giving. Say yes, and then, after a pause for reflection, list the reservations. It is essential that Israeli leadership not be swooned by the bold Herculean act of the U.S. president in cutting an Israeli-Palestinian peace deal. Yes, he is a friend, but he also wants a deal, and the deal will require Israel to concede to serious compromises and accommodations. The damage that the well-intentioned and grossly misinformed Clinton caused Israel in the diplomatic arena with Oslo has been incalculable. Israel is still suffering those consequences. The Trump administration has had benefit of time. They have studied a long history of doomed efforts, but they still want to broker a deal. They really want a deal. And when you want a deal so badly, sometimes closing the deal overrides the content of the deal. For proof, just look at the Iranian nuke deal. Coming up next, points of view. Here's what some important voices have been talking about. Both of the columns this week come from the New York Post. First up is a column by Jonathan Tobin. It's dated June 18, 2018, and it's entitled, Why the Establishment Despises Trump's Ambassador. That is the online title. The print title was The Right Stuff, Envoys Too Pro-Israel for the Establishment. Jonathan S. Tobin is the editor-in-chief of JNS.org and a contributor to National Review. Tobin begins by explaining his thesis that David Friedman, aka Trump's friend, who is the U.S. ambassador to Jerusalem, is not a mainstream person. He is demonized by the media and not highly regarded by diplomatic establishments. Tobin begins, the foreign policy establishment and the mainstream media agree David Friedman isn't their kind of U.S. ambassador to Israel. Friedman has been taking a pounding from the old hands who have represented Washington in the Middle East and their media echo chamber ever since President Trump named his former bankruptcy attorney to the post. While there's nothing new or unusual about presidents naming their friends and donors to ambassadorial posts, Israel has always been an exception. The primary responsibility of U.S. ambassadors, other than speaking up for America's interests and values, is to foster good relations between Washington and wherever it is that they've been posted. Not so with Israel. Every one of Friedman's predecessors was either a career foreign service officer or a product of the foreign policy think tanks, who all saw Israel as a problematic friend that, regardless of its virtues, needed to be brought to heel in order to foster peace. Tobin now moves to the PA and its leadership and why they hate Friedman. It's pretty obvious. He writes, the PA and its leader, Mahmoud Abbas, continue to spew anti-Semitism and make clear they aren't interested in anything that will end the conflict or recognize Israel's legitimacy, no matter where its borders are drawn. And Hamas is still pushing for return, which is to say Israel's destruction. In the absence of a peace partner, Friedman's pro-Israel boosterism is not only not an obstacle to peace, it is a refreshing reminder to the State Department that it should care more about supporting its sole democratic ally in the region and holding the Palestinians accountable for their behavior, and less about bludgeoning Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to make concessions to those who desire Israel's destruction. And now Tobin concludes with a simple statement about telling the truth. And this is what he writes. While no one is used to having an ambassador there who is a truth teller about the conflict, Friedman deserves credit, not censure. Second up is a column by Carol Markovich, and it is also from the New York Post. It was published on April 4th, 2018, and it's entitled, Why We're Forgetting the Holocaust. Markovich is a regular columnist for the New York Post. Here is how Markovich begins. A scary new survey released on the Holocaust Remembrance Day purported to show that Americans are forgetting the atrocities of the Holocaust. What it really showed, however, was that Americans don't learn enough to forget in the first place. The poll conducted by the Claims Conference, a group that administers compensation and other services to Holocaust survivors, found that 40% of millennials couldn't name a single death camp or ghetto. No Auschwitz, no Bergen-Belsen, and 31% of all Americans and 41% of millennials believe that fewer than 2 million Jews were killed in the Holocaust. The number is actually 6 million. While we still use millennials as shorthand for young people, millennials currently range in the age from mid-20s to late 30s. These are adults. Markovitch quotes Churchill in understanding just how important the Holocaust is. Winston Churchill wrote that the Holocaust was, quote, the most horrible crime ever committed in the whole history of the world. And it has been done by a scientific machinery by nominally civilized men. Markovitch makes a few suggestions. She writes, there are over 60 Holocaust museums and memorials throughout the United States. Visiting them should be part of the curriculum of any school in the vicinity of one of them. It shouldn't end at high school either. Any world history course that includes the study of 20th century should be spending some time on the Holocaust, preferably in depth. Adults ignorant of what happened were all teenagers once who weren't taught properly. The problem with an event that causes us to ask, how could this have happened, is that it is so easy to shift to, this couldn't have happened. It could, it did, and people need to know it. Coming up, commentary through cartoons, where pictures tell the story. Today we will look at 3 cartoons. The first is from Powerline and was drawn by E. Gillespie. It was published July 14th, 2018. A wife is at the kitchen island cutting vegetables. Her husband comes home and has his arms around 2 rabbis with beards. The wife is upset and she says, I told you to bring a couple of ribeyes home for dinner. Ribeyes, rebbes, rabbis. It's very funny and not at all political or offensive, which is nice for a change. Next up is a cartoon lampooning the U.S. move of the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem. It is called The Peace Process and was published in the Buffalo News on May 15th, 2018. A peace dove has an olive branch in its mouth, and part of the branch has a hand grenade. The hand grenade handle actually reads, Jerusalem and the U.S. Embassy. The third and final cartoon is on the same topic, just from the opposite point of view. It is by Nate Beener, and it was published in the Columbus Dispatch on May 15th again, 2018. And it's called Hamas Hate. A Hamas terrorist is walking on a red ribbon, and written on the ribbon is the word hate. The ribbon is in the shape of the symbol of infinity. In one hand, the terrorist is holding a sign that reads, Death to Israel. In his other hand is a newspaper. The headline reads, U.S. Embassy ribbon cutting in Jerusalem. The terrorist says, they will never cut my ribbon. In a moment, more of my own perspective and a few predictions. Sanctions against Iran often focus on oil. But one of the most famous industries in Iran will totally be eviscerated by the new U.S. sanctions. The carpet industry. Iran's carpet industry, their most famous Persian carpets, will lose hundreds of millions of dollars, as much as $500 million because of U.S. sanctions. The Iranian carpet industry employs hundreds of thousands of people. The industry will continue, but it will hobble along with only a fraction of the workers, and it will produce only a fraction of their famous Persian carpets, because there will be no market to sell them. After sanctions were lifted in 2016 under the Obama administration, and once the market opened, almost all Persian carpets that were produced in Iran were sold to the United States. What will happen now? Refugees are starting to return to Syria. Recently, 33 busloads of refugees, complete families, crossed from southern Lebanon back into Syria. They were on their way home. This was a group of several thousand people. Hundreds of thousands more are preparing for their return. It is the Russians that are setting the stage for this return. That's because Russia wants to repopulate Syria with Syrians. And Russia has several reasons for fulfilling this plan. The most important is to rebuild the economy. Syria needs to return to normal, and that requires the million-plus refugees now in Lebanon and Jordan to restart their lives back home in Syria. Russia also wants to bolster Assad. And the return of the refugees will not only bolster Assad, it will afford him stability and the ability to challenge the world view of anti-Assad forces. The future status of the stability of the country requires regular civilians to live normal lives. This is exactly the new norm that Russia is trying to get. ISIS has made a slow and steady comeback to Iraq. They've increased their operations and are focusing on kidnappings and killings. ISIS now is using guerrilla tactics in an attempt to instill fear and to slowly start controlling smaller sections of Iraq. This is all happening only a few short months after Iraq declared a total victory over ISIS. Only a few short months since ISIS was supposedly totally defeated. ISIS is now clearly making headway. ISIS is not yet controlling any region, but they are working towards that goal. ISIS's guerrilla operations need to be stopped. ISIS cannot be permitted to reconstitute itself in Iraq or in Syria. That is essential. The conspiracy theory about Israel destroying the mosque on top of the Temple Mount is again spreading throughout the Muslim world. This time, the stimulus for the conspiracy was the rock that was dislodged from the Western Wall and smashed to the ground. Osama Kawasme, a spokesman for the Fatah movement, called it a, quote, dangerous sign of what was happening in the Al-Aqsa Mosque and its surroundings, unquote. Yusuf Natche, the director of the Islamic Archaeology and Tourism at Haram al-Sharif, which is the Temple Mount, claimed that the dislodging of the boulder was not casual, unquote. And this is what he says. This is a dangerous incident. It was most likely pre-planned. This could have been a balloon test or experiment to determine the direction of the excavation, working the thickness of the walls of the Al-Aqsa Mosque. Unfortunately, sometimes rocks fall off walls. It happens for many different reasons. Sometimes, as in this case, the rock protruded from the arch which is known as the Robinson's Arch. And the arch is used to suspend a stairway that was destroyed in the year 70. That's 2,000 years ago. That's a very long time. Iran is responding now to U.S. diplomatic pressure. Once again, they have threatened the United States, saying that if the U.S. acts against Iranian oil exports, they will counter. Bahram Qasemi, Iran's spokesman for the Foreign Ministry, was quoted in Islamic Republic's news agency, saying, quote, if America wants to take a serious step in this direction, it will definitely be met with a reaction and equal countermeasures from Iran. Iran is not only referring to blocking the water channels that transport oil, they are also referring to diplomatic pressure. The United States is now aggressively working to stop countries from importing Iranian oil. Iran is a counterplan. On the diplomatic side, they are promising a serious response. We've been thinking out loud about a lot today. Now that you know what I've been thinking, let me know what you're thinking. Email me at micah@jbstv.org. Tweet me at Micah Halpern. Tell me what you think. Before we end, let me leave you with one piquante piece of information. We've been speaking about language and the importance of language and the abuse of language. Language is very important. It is very powerful. Language can hurt if used incorrectly. We have to learn how to control our language. Words have meaning and significance. God created the world by speaking. It was a word that God used in creation. Let there be light. Vayehi or means light. Vayehi is a command. In Hebrew, there is a category of language which is called the command. God spoke or commanded, and the world was created. Light was the first thing. We should remember that the world was created in a word, and we should remember just how powerful words can be. Thank you for thinking out loud with me, Micah Halpern. Let's think out loud again next week on JBS.
We would be pleased to send a complimentary DVD of this program to anyone who wishes to support JBS with a tax-deductible gift of $36, double chai or more. Simply visit the JBS website at jbstv.org and click on the Donate button to make a donation by PayPal or your credit card. And please, indicate the program for which you would like a DVD. Or you can send your tax-deductible check to JBS, P.O. Box 180, Riverdale Station, Bronx, New York, 10471. And again, please remember to indicate which program you would like to receive with our compliments. And we thank you for your kind support.